Lots of inhibitions and lots of restrictions. A day in the life of a medieval nun. Greetings! Today, we're going to talk about how nuns lived in the Middle Ages. What had to be sacrificed to get into a nunnery? Is it true that the nuns were watched by the daughter of the famous William the Conqueror? And how entertained nuns to get rid of monotony and even break some rules? Be sure to watch the video to the very end to have a full picture of the life of a medieval nun. The appearance of the first monasteries. As you have already guessed, some of the first female convents appeared in Western Europe. Mentions of such constructions refer to the IV century AD. Women who worshipped God and aspired to a moderate ascetic life just awaited their fate in monasteries. True, not every representative of the female sex could withstand the test before being ordained as a nun. Harsh conditions of entry. Perhaps some of you think that devoting your life to worship is a fairly simple occupation, accompanied by no weighty obstacles. Alas, but the female part of the population of medieval Europe had to go through several tests. Because these rules were formed around the beginning of the VI century and applied to all applicants. First, donation to the monastery. Even in those days, it was necessary to invest financially so that such an act to prove their desire to help others. Not every girl or woman could afford it, especially from a poor or underprivileged family. But ladies from the upper classes could afford it. Second, to start a new life, a woman had to give up many things. For example, to adhere to a strict daily schedule, to work for free, and to give up material possessions. This is a psychological ordeal that affected many people. Thirdly, the age restrictions. Girls younger than 6 years old and elderly women were not accepted as nuns. To all other things in monasticism were not welcomed infirm and incapacitated people. Therefore, such representatives of the female sex were also not taken to the sacred service. So why did they become nuns? You know, the female part of the population did not just want to connect their lives with a new position. They became nuns for a number of reasons: lack of opportunity or unwillingness to marry, punishment from others for slander and propaganda that went against public opinion and moral principles, posts in the convent. We call your attention to several positions that were characteristic of a nunnery. In view of the fact that the nuns were united up to 30 persons, such an abbey was governed by several people. Abbess. Such a woman, who was the abbess of a nunnery, was responsible for the administration and followed the general order. This position in the Middle Ages was considered quite prestigious. But to take the place of abbess, it was necessary to have wide connections. That is why she became a lady from noble and royal families. For example, in history, there is a known case, as one of the abbesses became the daughter of King William the Conqueror, prioress. Prioresses were positions of women who reported directly to the abbess. In essence, it was the right hand of the latter. The prioress was in charge of the household and also prepared food for all the members of the convent. A male chaplain. He kept an eye on the women to make sure they didn't break the rules and behaved properly in the sacred place. Only, it didn't always work out that way. A little later, we will just tell you how the nuns had fun and what they could afford. Daily routine and activities in a nunnery. Here we come to the key point in the life of a medieval nun. Let's finally talk about what the day was in the eyes of women of such a position and what the nuns did in the convent. So, the whole day consisted of 3 main activities: prayer, physical labour, and reading religious texts. This went on day after day, which once again proves one thing. Austerity and monotony are the key rules for a medieval nun. As for prayer, girls and women prayed 7 times a day. And the very first prayer began before sunrise, at 2 a.m., and in the morning they prayed at 6 a.m. It was also allowed between night and early morning to sleep. Physical labour for the nuns was an integral part and became the main activity. These included working on farmland, knitting, and even copying books. Therefore, many had to be in the role of illustrators. The total duration of physical labour for nuns was from 5 to 6 hours. Although girls and women worked for free, they had all the essentials, natural food and a roof over their heads. Most likely you will ask, what about the educational classes? We answer, yes, the female part of the monastery was taught to read and write. The basics of literacy were indeed taught, and from different ages. The latter is the reading of religious texts in female monasteries of the Middle Ages. The duration of this activity was at least 2 hours each day. Can you imagine that nuns dressed exclusively in 2 colours, black and white clothes? It was such shades that identified the main essence in the sacred service and testified to chastity, order and obedience. Regarding eating and sleeping too, attention should be paid. On the tables of women's monasteries, bread, meat, vegetables, milk were necessarily present. Particular attention was paid to products of protein origin because nuns worked not only mentally but also physically. As in most cases, meals consisted of breakfast, a solid lunch and dinner. If relatives and friends brought treats to the monasteries, which was welcomed, the nuns shared them with everyone. But nuns slept in common rooms with other girls and women, and straw was used instead of mattresses in the beds, a violation of the rules. As we promised, we will talk about how the nuns violated the prohibitions in women's monasteries. Such actions are associated with the fact that girls and women often got tired of solid prohibitions and numerous restrictions. Therefore, they sometimes sought to allow themselves more than just worship. For example, many nuns had their own chests, which they hid from others. Due to the fact that according to the rules they did not have property, girls and women could borrow jewelry and other valuables from others. Also, some managed to get a pet, a cat or a dog. It was allowed to leave the convent and stop serving, but it happened only in extreme cases and with the permission of a superior. Some nuns chose a completely different solution. For this purpose, they secretly met men, and when the occasion was right, they ran away from the monastery altogether. In order not to attract attention from others, nuns spoke in whispers or used gestures. Lastly, nuns often had affairs with members of their own sex. A new law passed at the time prohibited same-sex marriages. To avoid suspicion and responsibility, women slept with a lighted candle and kept their clothes on. Conclusion. Thus, the life of a medieval nun is full of prohibitions and restrictions. Even before entering a new position, many girls and women experienced a number of difficulties. Yes, and after the assignment of a new status, part of the nuns could not fully adapt to the new conditions. Because of this, various violations regularly occurred.